1861 AD. It was somewhat cooler there for the mordant man as he crouched underneath the needle filled branches of the old gangling pine tree that provided some adornment above his hot sweating frame. The sweltering flats of the open prairie could scorch a man back to his basic elements and ash him in only a few weeks, even a man like Vermon Voyle. In full posture, he could stretch out to about 6 foot 4 inches, his long brown mane covering the upper half of his husky frame. He watched all alone as a faraway dust bowl turned into an approaching wagon coming his way. Vermon in the past few years had been very good at avoiding the strangers that were always encroaching upon his hideouts, coming on while riding aboard their steel-framed wooden panel wagons. They were settlers coming from the east, with thoughts in mind to conquer the New World, or the untamed West, but Vermon didn't trust their kind, not even one of them. Currently, he had friends, but they weren't of the living kind because they were all dead, buried by the hands more kind than his own. His friends were good listeners while residing underground beneath many tall yellow grasses that obscured many other old scattered grave sites existing there too. Dust often rose up from the heaped piles of sun-baked rock that was once gathered there by someone's cheerful kinfolk. A wooden stick cross often was planted and left behind to indicate that their departed was buried there with the last mission, only to gather up some hungry earthworms. For those left alive, surviving amongst rattlesnakes of all sorts, made it a fight just to stay alive, causing the self-righteous and remaining kinfolk to just say a short prayer and then be gone to carry on with the ever-changing winds throughout their time. Later on, a lantern's light might capture some of them clinging to some material possession that might define their flight, like many freshly printed picture books full of photos and captions that had brought them this far in the first place. It could be filled with images like golden shiny rocks full of nuggets and shiny gang material that had often been found perhaps beneath the swift currents of the crystal waters belonging to the South Platte River or elsewhere. The eastern towns sizzled with red-hot rumors of discovered gold found in California and along the South Platte River. Surely its financial yield was beyond measure. In taverns and bars, unthinkable curiosities developed inside of drunkards' minds everywhere. The disease of greed spread like wildfire to be rich and kindled a poor man's invasion into the West, where fathers of families dreamt of gaining a better life somehow. Ready and willing hordes of them became prepared to travel into the far West, if they could only make it with their covered wagons across the hardships that awaited them. Many dreams to drench, perhaps too many, and fool's gold would eventually fill many leather pouches, yet there were a few hungry men that otherwise gathered well. Most gold seekers knew of chemistry, of nuggets and flakes. A rare few actually learned the art of separating gold or silver from their other base metals, requiring a chemistry background, because it is stinky and above all things it is extremely dangerous as well. Cyanide can kill someone even in a campsite quite a ways downwind, and Vermon was well aware of this detail. He had seen 3 men die already because of false concoction put in the creek on one rainy day last July, causing treachery amongst an already pitiful disaster. Vermon was a very well-educated reader of scientific journals. He was a rarity indeed for these parts of the wild. He was a displaced, healthy, middle-aged Easterner, usually hungry and very wildly dwelling in the wilderness of the Old West. Oh yes, a criminal, no doubt that he was. He had come to this level through circumstance and much more along the way. In contrast, once he was a Puritan Bible-waving city slicker, a towner of sort, not a caveman, nor a cannibal. But bad luck spiraled to this day from one very complicated moment some years ago. Bighorn Ford caught him holding a full house poker hand, which made two of them at the wrong gaming table. He shot Bighorn with a pistol, killing him. He got away after shooting the place up and torching the whole building with a room lantern, at last escaping through a broken upstairs window. Another great escape he had figured, until getting caught later on that same day at a local brothel, drunk and in the arms of a girl named Sue Ho. Immediately, a new hanging galley was finally finished after the first few days, and rumors raised the town preceding the trial. The hanging judge, Ray Sonny High, was called on by the Mayor Finch, and he finally showed up with his Chinese wife on the stage. No long trial for Vermon by Sonny High. It lasted only a single hour, disappointing the whole town. He was sentenced to 120 years of hard labor with no option for parole or even good time, all for killing of a local banker's son. Good behavior gave him the only option. It meant the whip, or it was. Often called the Southern Whip, a 40-man team of very tired, angry, criminal prisoners that literally hated swamp country and the leeches that always fed upon them there. One day, the leader of the sadistic guard squad called the Goons was having lunch with a very non-innocent local girl named Tina. She was quite young and beautiful, with very luring eyes. He was also not without a promiscuous nature, but promised very little good sense. Because of a southern willow tree, Vermon and a man named Bart managed to reemerge from under the water, beheading him with some strips of bark taken from a tall forest oak tree. His head was lifted and thrown into the midst of the criminals, and the whole place violently erupted. Soon afterwards, yet painfully later, the two men's attention returned back to the beauty possessed by the tremendously unfortunate, sweet little Tina, where she was oftentimes raped and severely beaten within the marshy waterland. The men of the whip rebelled against the guards, quickly killing 2 more prison guards before capturing all the rest of them, keeping each man inside a tight, brutish circle of snarling men where terror lingered for them. Their lives were spared only temporarily, as a mock trial quickly ensued. Drowning and stick beating came to all of them in an alphabetical sequence carried out by all of the whip. Once freed and on the lam, the hellish prison chain gang finally dispersed into all and every direction, leaving only a few other rival inmates still fighting each other. Vermon also headed far, far west, where he never stopped traveling until eventually made it to the Colorado Highlands. Narrowly surviving that ordeal, he was brought to crossing the vast western frontier, where many other more gruesome levels of survival came along, testing his hunting skills. Finding himself vested deep into the vast wilderness territories of Colorado, lacking gunpowder supplies and other necessities of basic life, dire consequences and danger were also at hand. For instance, a simple failure with a stick trap or mock hunting with a broken spear, perhaps, could put him into a state of virtual starvation and then death, or maybe even bringing him into cannibalism. Vermon's compadre, Bart, suffered little from his stab wound, and he rapidly died one cold winter's day in December. Stomach pains had brought on the murder from Vermon, as he was tired and lacking of meat, and it wasn't long, just hours before hunger led him to become a human flesh hunter. No blood, no bodies, just friends, observed. Being social was a dirty little chore for him when he had decided not to practice in, if he could get it, around it. Preferring a good kill and then a meal than idly talking with most people. No socialism with people or folks that has simply become a food source. Maybe it was hatred. Sometimes he'd wonder very truly. Lacking much wisdom he might have gained from his life by practical experience, ironically, he was much more curious than smart. The crisp, echoing sound of many horse hooves being hammered onto the hardened dirt of the dry land carried into his ears, coming on from the only remnant artery still visible after last night's rain had dissolved the lighter trails. Breathing more heavily as the omen progressed towards his hideaway, sweat began pouring out of his body and dripping from his forehead until finally he fell onto the dried yellow soil under his unattired bare feet. Oncoming was only a small party of forlorn women settlers, one wagoner steering two worn-out ponies that were pulling in unison, the clique from the openness of the prairie heading towards a heavily treed forest grove. The wagon carried water barrels strapped steadfast along both of its sides, with the interior stocked full of goods and supplies, leaning every inch with the driver as he moved around, pulling to and fro against the leather reins, dodging every dip in the dirt trail as best that he could arrange. The wooden sheathing that made up the carriage popped and creaked as it stood against the unsteady weight that it possessed and held inward during the dusty ride. A tired pony could be spotted very easily from an expert's eye by noticing the slowness in his gait. Sometimes he may even stumble or half-step. It's hard to explain, Herman thought in solitaire before he began slowly moving closer towards the glen, hiding behind some creek thickets packed full of katydids and other crickets. He was an accomplished stealth and very good at hiding away as he studied the terrain, looking for blending features that might suit his colors in order to hide with the trees and ever-present dried weed brush. Only shadows from his long brush-aped body cast dark shadows onto the almost green naked grasses as he moved around, watching and listening for signs of traveling wagons that might come from behind the first, but there were no other stragglers coming along. By sneaking along a shadowy tree line against a root, he was able to gain some advantage where he could freely notice and look out onto the busy folk as they headed for a well-known camp arena. His nest of curiosity attracted him ever nearer to the seller's campsite, yet still bewildered. Waiting in silence, he listened to the field for the sounds of ponies' hooves being slammed down onto the surface of the old creek bed. Finally, sounds erupted, yet somehow they were dampened by the clad paddy creeks that had survived the seasonal rains over a period of 10 or more years. Vermin could hear the speechcraft of many scandalous women talking inside the cloth-covered wagon as it drew ever nearer, and then eventually stopped inside an often unoccupied campsite. The carry-tell rhetoric of the women folk often parted his scope of concentration for only just a brief moment. Then he swiftly withdrew to study in the process of killing the other men. Lightning trespassed the skies westerly through some purple-colored clouds where the sun had been hiding, and a cool breeze poured over the flatness of the prairie, causing the voices of the women to calm, giving a great ease to the once disrupted air. A rabbit charged into the brown grasses that had long survived the dryness, cast onto the countryside. Only a pony stirred as he carefully crept inside the invisible fortress within hearing range of their words, lurking not too far off, yet close enough for his nose to gather up the scents from the women's perfume. Vermin loved the erotic mixture of perfume smell coming from the hive of females existing and exciting him to an extra degree. The wood scavenging party dressed a fire later to bring the sweet smell of pork fat simmering under a side of beef frying from inside a steel pan. The smell of it cast into the air by the flame weakened him ever more as hunger pains burned into his ribs. Patience was not his greatest virtue, as he had become quite eager just to meet one of the women and against his better thinking. He fought against this urge with fear and managed to keep silent, yet lingering in the tall grasses undetected while watching the scene. To approach the wagon any closer would be risky, and perhaps it would even be a suicidal maneuver. No, I can't go in yet. Trouble could be at hand, he thought, because there was some shamelessness he felt already about the man. History had taught him that grave trouble often can erupt soon after walking in on someone, no matter what the conditions, as folks don't like unwary surprises in such a way. It was in the minds of almost every pilgrim of the day that a single wayfarer could and usually did mean trouble for them. Solitary cowboys were normally a very brassy breed. If you want trouble, then let a complete stranger come in for a cup of pan coffee, most of them thought. He had heard it spoken many times repeatedly while listening on to many of the fireside chats. Killings and gunfights had been known to occur over a simple cup of coffee, and an open invitation to sit down and talk somehow always led to more than innocent chat with a stranger. Lead, gunpowder, and billy clubs were the only real law out in these parts, where ambushes often happened to people. Yet Vermon had no such intention at this time. Most pioneers were set with fear very early on, even from before the time when they left out of the East. The product of rumors filled their minds. Many famous outlaws and even certain frontiersmen were simply cold-blooded killers, truly animal-like. But unfortunately, this rhetoric was carried over to the lonesome cowboy of the Old West. No matter what the situation, Erman kept a close eye on the weary group as evening began to fall down upon them. Vermon was truly a living bad man, a cruel human, a killer beast. He had long since made a bargain with death, and his psychological cycles they called for him to devour and then eat the flesh of innocent human beings. Yet it made him very unique, a unique man, very torn between love and hate, a bitter calling to say the least, as he has destroyed many innocent families throughout the passing of his many years. Much like the darkness that reigned within his mind, he had finally grown to accept it all. Seldom over the decades, but even then not very often, a spark of humanity might fire inside of him, and he might look for ways to explain the gruesome curse that had molded him over the long years. Being a brute was only part of the dark side to his personal reality. Not much excited him except death and women. Being a very disturbed person most of the time, Vermon was forced to avoid contact with others. Yet he was still fascinated by beautiful females and longed for the feeling that one can receive by having some social contact with them, even dead ones. Recently, by his own choosing, he elected a solitary style of living, but an emptiness eventually arose inside of his being, and it was something that continually devoured away at him from deep down inside. Vermon never tried to deny he was a bloodthirsty psycho to anyone, or that he had a severe night hunting affliction, especially during the full moon cycles when he couldn't sleep. Yet during the daylight hours, he was seemingly a normal man, with every passion intact, even though he tried to abandon his primitive desire to have a beautiful woman in his life. Yet some things are not always possible. He had always possessed an insatiable lust for young females of all the small villages and tribes of Indians in his past years and experiences, but to the date he had never found a woman in which to truly love. At the woman's first arrival, he'd almost lost all of his self-control, and holding back was hard for him to do. He further listened to them talking inside of the wagon shell as it plodded forward towards a nearby campground that others had previously used. His nerves were on edge, and it could have been the delicate and soft voices of the females coming from inside the wagon shell that excited him, or perhaps it was the sweet smell of musk perfume that carried upon a mellow breeze. But the moment was strong enough for him to spark a memory hidden deep from inside his troubled mind. He had unusual abilities. He was a special kind of human form, and he had sensed the oncoming of the females long before the wagon had ever come to within sight distance. And he also knew that there were three females of young womanhood under the tarpaulin-covered shell. Cannibals have a powerful mating instinct that leads them on and on to forever seek out a special mate that usually they never ever find. To say the least, there had been many innocent women devoured in the almost endless search to find the right one, and yet it is a passion that only gets stronger for them over their life term. A powerful sexual desire boiled within him for the immediate companionship of one or perhaps all three of them. Yet he knew that only 2 days' time that the moon would be shining full again, and he might kill them all. Yes, he quietly growled to himself, I shall do it again. And he knew that more than likely that he would. Pretty soon the group of travelers stopped for the evening. Whoa! The driver with the reins yelled out to the team. Captain! What are we stopping for? One of the ladies asked in a smart tone. Is it already sundown? She asked. Her voice from within the wagon easily carried through the canvas fabric and reached the driver. Whoa! The captain commanded again to the team, but never stopped humming a short tune out loud with his deep voice all the while. He stopped to reply back to the inquiry from inside the covered wagon, but gave it up and twisted his face out of anguish. He finally tied the reins to the buckboard after the team came to a standstill, then shuffled inside the harnesses and whinnied, mildly nervous, yet ready for a rest. As the evening grew on, they would be allowed to feed upon the green grasses that crawled from the darkened banks of the white, dry creek bed. The captain was a big, burly sort of man, and also a slaver. He was made by God to be a natural-born laborer of the earth, with very broad shoulders and thick bones. His big hands could grasp another man's neck and break it easily if he had good reason to do so. God had made him to work with his muscles very easily. He and the rest of the party were all salt of the earth kind. They had all come to be traveling settlers simply because they were dreamers and needed a fair shake at an opportunity that arose. A fair shake was very hard to find back from where they had all come from, and a person need not be literate to listen to the fantasies and tales of the rich, far western frontiersmen. At the time it seemed that words of prosperity were carried on. Almost every Eastern tongue and couple with a sense of extreme moral authority further motivated to head west was no longer needed, and new homesteading became an adventure all of its own. Witch hunting was still commonplace in certain parts of the eastern territories, like Salem and others, and new beliefs and concepts were still emerging from the old evil ways. Old habits were slow to change in the people, especially then. Vermon was very cautious as he slowly crept down over the creek's embankment and then finally into the moist interior of the nearby water spill, where he found plenty of camouflaged amongst a batch of tall katydids and other thickets, and once in a perfect spot he settled his body onto an old petrified aspen tree that yielded a perfect vantage point. He could still look out and see the company of women and the one man that pilfered into one of the women's bags, up beyond a moderate incline of earth that normally made for a fire pit. On this night he was very content just to study the crowd from a distant place in full view. "Oh, you wretched witch," the bigoted captain said to the younger blonde-haired girl in the party. "Where's my bottle at?" He further insisted to question her. She was the meek sort and backed away from him as if she knew nothing. It was pretty obvious for Vermin to see that the man was bullying her for some reason, special attention, later on perhaps, and he figured that the young girl was probably still a virgin. "Look," the rough man said to her crudely, "I'll sell you virgin or dirty. Either way, you're still worth $500 to me." The young girl backed away even farther from the brute, yet he still approached her even closer. She was shaking and trembling from fear, but not a whimper came from her lips. "Go make my tent up and neatly spread the bedroll out. Be gone with yourself, you hear me?" He spoke to her sadistically as he unknowingly pointed towards the thickets where Vermin was secretly hiding. "Your daddy won't help you now, you little girl," he taunted her as she went away crying towards the misted marsh. The man returned over to where the other women were at. "You women want to get there early?" he asked of them. "I mean, I could take my sweet time, don't you know?"
"Yeah, you're taking us to the dens, aren't you? The pleasure dens?"
one of the slightly older ladies was compelled to inquire of him.
"People die very early in those places because of the diseases,"
another one of them said. "Yeah, you're trash anyway. What's the difference from where I stole you from? I mean, we're working inside of a brothel, except the girl," he snickered as he sounded the young girl's name to them.
"You're the trash,"
as the last of the women that had been standing by interjected. But suddenly the man rubbed his revolver and showed it clearly to the angry bunch of women that he was sensing that an attack to be coming on shortly. They backed off only after sensing his gesture and didn't crowd him anymore. The man was called the captain for a reason, and he had a bad reputation for being extremely brutal to his slave women. Many of the slave girls showed up at the sex camps missing a finger or part of an ear. He was rudely known to take a slave's finger off with a single shot, but actually nothing was beyond his boundaries ever. Out in the wilds, no one lived to tell revealing stories anyway. "You witches be good. I'm going to bed," he said to them and then left. The stars burned holes into the dark sky of the night of an August torment for the youngest of the slave girls, as he lived up to his name as being a rapist as well. The girl had found a hiding place in a cave nearby, but it was full of old bear hair and bat dung that hung from the top of the rounded ceiling and dripped stench onto the cave floor. He mistakenly thought that she had evaded the eye of Slaver Nick while he bickered with the other women. However, his eyes were following her very closely all along, and a sinister breeze crept into the darkened area as he crept up the cave where she was hiding at. At the entrance of the cave, Nick slowly appeared by gathering his height at the threshold and showing his darkened figure to the girl that swallowed up all of the starlight from the heavens. It was Nick, and he spoke to the hiding figure of the frightened young girl, slave girl, that he could not clearly see. "Daddy has come to see you tonight," he said with his grumbled voice that was even fouler than the stinking bat dung that clung to her skinny legs. She stood up on her feet and kicked some dirt towards the large man that probably had a deadly intention in mind for her as well. And she backed even further into the rock chamber. Her fear smartly overcame her until there was no more room to run. "You're not going to let me live, are you?" she asked him. "Daddy must keep some secrets, you know, little girl. But maybe if you do what I want you to do," he told her as if she were to understand his thinking. "Now take your clothes off so your new daddy don't have to rip them off of you. I would hate to have to tear them up, you know." "No," she screamed. "I won't do it. Ah!" She screamed again and again, but no one came to immediately rescue her. The sound of the young girl screaming excited the slaver ever more, and he suddenly leaped at her. Soon he had her on the cave floor, where he was tearing away at her Cinderella-style clothing, and all of his tremendous weight had her pinned down. His wheezing lungs had to breathe deeply during the excitement, and he stopped his aggression towards her for a short while, long enough to get his breath, when there became a sound at the entrance of the cave. It disturbed him that someone might interrupt his personal festivities, and his blood flowed red hot for the intruder as he rose to his feet. "You're going to get some real treatment, whoever you are," he screamed at the top of his half-shattered voice, while he rushed to the edge of the cavern, all the while overlooking a figure that lingered inside a shadow nearby. Thunk was the sound as the dirty slaver's head hit the rock bottom, and then all of him further rolled down the incline to where the other women were staying at. The rest of his torso dropped like a bean bag and dripped red blood jelly everywhere. Later, one of the slaves yelled loudly, which brought the captain back to consciousness, and then he rose to his feet from his fright.
"I hear them dirty dogs coming from the ranch,"
she said sharply. From afar, vociferous sounds were detected by the party of distraught women, suggesting an uproar amongst other rogue travelers, possibly thieves slovenly communicating amongst themselves, carried quickly into the damp night air, and was keenly detected by those in camp. On such an evening, loud voices might easily travel a mile, or even further. All of the excitement aroused within Vermon a true craving for the taking of another human life. Hunger was beginning to grow intensely deep inside of his stomach, and he was rapidly losing his human senses to those of the hungry beast within him. It could be a while, he knew for sure, but not too long before his mental change occurred, and he might lose control.